what happens. And, we ended the session last year with the General Assembly not just changing what was in the budget after a Republican budget earning Democratic votes and passing, being vetoed by the governor, and then the October bipartisan budget, which was strongly getting votes from both sides of the aisle, that came out with some seeds of reform. It came out with defining for the first time in 25 years the spending cap parameters. That needed a 2/3 vote of each chamber, and that hadn't happened since the constitutional amendment was passed back in '94. It came with a borrowing cap that for the first time to limit and put a check on the amount of bonding that goes on, and it came out with something called the volatility cap, which Kevin Limbo had talked about and other legislators to kind of even off the peaks and the valleys. Right now, there's people over at the Department of Revenue Services who are thrilled because there's a surge of revenue that's coming in. And there are some legislators that normally get thrilled when that happens. And there was a press conference last Friday, and there were competing budgets in the Appropriations Committee to spend some of that money, or do we bank some of that money? The 2-year budget, which essentially becomes a 1-year budget, leads to short-term thinking. Sometimes, the 2-year election cycle is the same thing. And so what happens, it's a tendency, it's kind of natural, that the budget becomes a balance sheet. Revenues, expenditures, when they're done, you walk away. And then policy is affected to the good or ill. It should be the other way around. And part of what Joe was saying, part of at least the recognition in creating that commission was that someone's got to take a look at the long term and set the right policies to drive the budget numbers, to drive the balance sheet. So in one of those examples, if you haven't, bring John Carl Casa in here from the Nonprofit Alliance. They will tell you there's $1.3 billion, I think is their figure, over 3 years that can be saved by the state if they do what Joe was talking about. If the state looked at ways to deliver the core services with the nonprofit service providers that are in the communities today. Those are good jobs. And they can, in some ways, name that tune, if you will. They can provide that service with greater efficiency and more impersonal, more personal care. We began the session, so our wish list was right here, which is let's make job one the workforce, and let's focus on filling those 13,000 jobs that are in manufacturing. Last year, the session, there was a bill that changed. Number one, it created a separate board of trustees for the technical high schools, the old VOTEC schools, to give them the command focus that they need. That's good. That's getting up and running now. They did reduce, that same legislation, reduce the number of years of service required to teach in those schools and in the community colleges by a couple of years, again, like the bills that Joe was talking about seeks to do this year, to bring real world experience into those classrooms. And so with the economy growing and jobs growing slightly in 2017, I think our first thing is to do no harm. Don't make those jobs more complicated and more costly right now. Yes, the budget's always important. It's always overshadowing everything. But our message to the General Assembly, whether it was regulatory reform and easing up on first-time mistakes, as long as no harm was caused to the environment, on keeping energy costs low, on keeping labor costs low, and not rushing in to boost the minimum wage, and to do some of the other things. In some ways it's timing. Robin Porter, by the way, opened the door on the pay equity bill Joe was talking about, so we could do our job, which is to inform and help shape policy. We sat at a table about this size with Representative Porter and some of the proponents of that legislation to come to a compromise, to come and help bring our experience to the table. And that's good. There'll be times when we'll disagree down the line with some bills, but anytime we can be at the table on behalf of our members and bringing their expertise. We've got some really, really bright people who are the tax leads in our companies that get together and they help us evaluate different tax proposals, the same with labor, the same with workers' comp. So our wish list was really on that, which is let's focus on jobs. Let's implement what was passed in 17. Let's stick with those reforms and those seeds of reforms and how budgets are put together as we roll into what is still supposed to be the short session.
And when you mention priorities,